Everyone in the family thought Margaret was gentle, calm, and too soft to ever push back. She was the type of woman who brought warm food to neighbors, who sent long birthday messages, who always said it's okay, even when it wasn't. At 61, she had lived enough life to know that peace was better than pride. But that day, the day her daughter-in-law Lisa told her to back off, something in Margaret shifted. The story begins early one Sunday morning. The house was peaceful, sunlight touching the curtains, and Margaret was preparing a small breakfast for her grandson, Noah. She had been watching him every weekend so her son Daniel and his wife could rest. It wasn't an obligation for her. It was joy, but lately, something had changed. Lisa had become sharp, distant, and critical. Every small thing Margaret did, how she folded laundry, how she held Noah, how she packed snacks, was suddenly wrong. Still, Margaret stayed quiet. She thought it was stress, or maybe new mother anxiety. She tried to understand, but then came the message that changed everything. It wasn't even a phone call, just a text. A short, cold, almost careless text. Margaret, stop interfering in our household. We don't need your advice. Thanks. The word interfering hit harder than anything else. She wasn't interfering. She was helping. She had been helping long before Lisa even joined the family. Margaret sat down quietly on the sofa, holding the phone like it suddenly weighed 10 pounds. At first, she wanted to cry. Then she wanted to defend herself. Then she wanted to call her son and ask what was happening. But she deemed single quotes instead. She breathed slowly, letting the sting settle. And as she sat there, quietly processing the message, another thought slowly rose inside her, one she had never considered before. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to fight. She didn't even need to explain. Because there was something Lisa had forgotten. Something only Margaret controlled: the trust fund. 4 years ever since Daniel got married, Margaret had quietly set aside a trust fund for their future as a family. A large one. A safety net that could help with a home, a business, Noah's school, anything they might need. Margaret never mentioned it because she didn't want them to depend on it. She simply wanted them to feel secure. Daniel knew about it. Lisa did not, and maybe that was for the best. As the morning passed, Margaret replayed the text in her mind. Stop interfering. We don't need your advice. Advice. She had offered nothing but support. She thought about all the nights she stayed awake when Daniel was young. All the sacrifices she made to give him stability. All the years she worked 2 jobs so he never felt the absence of his father. And now, after everything, she was being told to back off, not by her son, but by someone who barely knew the weight of that history. Margaret stood up slowly, put her phone on the table, and walked to the kitchen sink. She turned on the tap, washed her hands, and looked at her reflection in the small window above the sink. Her eyes were tired, yes, but there was strength in them she hadn't noticed in years. She dried her hands, opened her old oak cabinet, and pulled out the dark blue folder she had kept hidden at the very back. Inside were the trust fund papers. She flipped through them carefully, page after page, and then she found the small card with her lawyer's number. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She simply dialed. "Good morning, Margaret," her lawyer said cheerfully. "What can I help you with today?" Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. "I'd like to freeze the trust fund," she said. There was silence on the line, followed by a gentle, cautious question. "Permanently, or temporarily?" Margaret looked out the window, again the same window through which she'd watched her son grow, stumble, and rise again. "For now," she said softly. "Temporarily is enough." She had no idea she was about to start a chain of events Lisa was completely unprepared for. And this was only the beginning. Asterisk. 2 days passed before anything happened. Margaret followed her normal routine, watering the plants, calling her sister, taking Noah to the park when Daniel dropped him off. Nothing felt unusual except for the quiet confidence inside her. The one that whispered that she had finally drawn a boundary. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, her phone vibrated. It was Daniel. "Mum. Did something happen?" he asked. Margaret paused. She felt her heartbeat rise, but she kept her tone steady. "What makes you ask, dear?" Well, Daniel hesitated. Lisa seemed upset this morning. She said something about us not getting the trust money yet. She said there was supposed to be a transfer this week. Ah, so that's when it hit. Margaret closed her eyes for a brief second. She hadn't expected Lisa to find out so soon. She had been planning to stay quiet. She wasn't trying to punish anyone. She simply didn't want her kindness taken for granted. What trust money? Margaret asked calmly. The deposit you schedule every quarter, Daniel replied. You always send it at the start of the month. That was true. Margaret had kept it consistent for years, and Daniel had always used it responsibly, mostly for Noah's needs. But, apparently, someone else had been counting on it. Margaret sighed softly. I froze it for the time being. There was a long silence. Mum. Why? Margaret's chest tightened. She loved her son. She didn't want him caught in the middle, but she also couldn't hide the truth. Well, she said gently, I received a message from Lisa. She asked me to stop interfering, so I'm giving her what she requested. No involvement. At all. Daniel exhaled loudly. Mum. She didn't mean it like that. Daniel, Margaret said softly, your wife told me not to be part of your household decisions. The trust fund is part of those decisions. There was another pause. Then Daniel whispered, she didn't tell me she sent that. That didn't surprise Margaret. Before they could continue, a second call started buzzing on her phone. Lisa, Margaret's stomach tightened. She didn't want conflict. She didn't like tension. She had lived her entire life avoiding loud arguments. But this time, she knew running would only make things worse. Hold on, she said to Daniel. Your wife is calling me now? Mum, please. But she had already switched calls. Hello, Lisa. Lisa's voice came fast and sharp. Margaret, we need to talk. I'm listening. You froze the trust fund. Why would you do that? We needed that transfer this month. Margaret could hear the frustration, the panic under Lisa's voice, but she kept her tone calm, almost warm. You told me to stop interfering, so I am staying out of things. That's not what I meant. Lisa snapped. I meant stop giving advice, not this. Margaret stayed silent for a moment, letting the words settle. Lisa, she said gently, you cannot pick which parts of my involvement you want. Respect doesn't work that way. There was a heavy pause. Lisa's tone softened but carried frustration. Okay, fine. I overreacted, but you should have talked to us before freezing it. I should have, Margaret admitted, but you also should have spoken to me in a kinder way. Lisa stayed quiet. The silence stretched. Can we meet? Margaret asked finally. All three of us. I want clarity, not conflict. Lisa exhaled. Fine, tonight. When the call ended, Margaret leaned back on her sofa. Her chest felt tight, but not with fear, with strength. Quiet strength. Tonight would decide everything. And none of them were ready for what would be said at that dining table, especially Lisa. The house felt different that evening. Still, quiet, almost too calm-like. The air was waiting for something important to happen. Margaret arrived a few minutes early. She always liked being early. It gave her time to settle herself. She brought a small box of cookies for Noah. Even though she knew this meeting wasn't about warm gestures, when Daniel opened the door, his expression said everything. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He simply looked. Stuck between two people he loved. Mum, he said softly, stepping aside. Come in. Margaret smiled gently and walked toward the dining area. She could hear movement in the kitchen, Lisa's footsteps, quick and restless. The tension sat in the air like fog. Lisa finally came out, smoothing her hair and forcing a small smile. Hi, Margaret.
Hello, dear.
Margaret replied in a calm tone. For a moment, no one spoke. Daniel gestured for them to sit at the dining table. The same table where they ate Sunday dinners. The same table where Margaret had fed Noah mashed bananas for the first time. Now it was the table where a conversation that none of them wanted. but all of them needed was about to happen. Daniel cleared his throat first. "Mum, Lisa told me what she texted you. She didn't mean to hurt you. She was frustrated, and she chose the wrong words." Lisa looked down at her hands, embarrassed. Margaret nodded slowly. "I understand frustration. I've felt it myself." Lisa took a small breath and finally spoke. "I really am sorry, Margaret. I shouldn't have said what I said." Margaret appreciated the apology. But there was something deeper behind all of this. She could feel it. People don't snap out of nowhere. People don't lash out without a reason. There was something under the surface Lisa didn't want to reveal. She folded her hands gently and said, "Lisa, I accept your apology, but I want to understand something. Why did you feel I was interfering?" "I only tried to help." Lisa's eyes shifted, almost nervously. She glanced at Daniel for a second before speaking. "It's just, I feel like I'm failing sometimes. And when you step in, even when you're trying to help, I feel like it shows my weakness." Ah, there it was. Not anger. Not disrespect. Insecurity. Margaret softened. She hadn't expected that answer. "I never wanted you to feel weak," she said gently. "I raised Dania alone. I know what pressure feels like. I know how heavy motherhood is. I wasn't trying to replace you." Lisa blinked hard, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her voice came out quieter. "I know. But sometimes, when I see how naturally Noah connects with you, I feel like I'm not doing enough. Like he prefers you?" Margaret was taken aback. She had never imagined her help could make Lisa feel replaced. Daniel reached for Lisa's hand gently, giving it a soft squeeze. "You're a great mother. You just don't give yourself enough credit." Lisa managed a weak smile, but her eyes stayed. Glassy. Margaret leaned forward, her voice low and warm. "Lisa, sweetheart, I love Noah. But that child adores you. No one could take your place. Not me, not anyone." For a moment, the heaviness in the room shifted. It didn't disappear. But it softened. But there was still the matter of the trust fund. Daniel was the one who brought it up. "So, about the fund," he said, speaking carefully. "We were counting on it this month. Not for anything unnecessary. For something important." Margaret raised a brow. "Important? Like what?" Daniel exchanged a look with Lezawan that carried worry. Lisa finally spoke. "We were planning to enroll Noah in a private therapy program." Margaret's heart tightened. "Therapy? What kind? Is something wrong?" No, Lisa said quickly. "Nothing serious. But he's a little behind." In his speech, "The program is expensive, but it helps kids catch up fast." The deposit was due this week. Margaret's chest warmed and ached at the same time. Her grandson. Her sweet Noah. She immediately wished she had known sooner. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Lisa looked down again, ashamed. "Because I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it. And I didn't want to feel like I was asking for money." Margaret breathed out slowly. The situation made sense now. The frustration, the insecurity, the text message, the urgency about the trust fund. This wasn't about money. This was about fear, fear of being judged, fear of failing as a mother. Margaret swallowed gently. "Lisa, helping Noah isn't interfering. It's family." Lisa's eyes finally lifted, softer this time. "I know. I just didn't want to disappoint you." Margaret reached across the table and touched Lisa's hand lightly. You never disappointed me. You're doing your best. And that is enough. The atmosphere shifted again this time in a healing way. But the night wasn't over yet, because before Margaret could say another word, her phone buzzed on the table. Daniel picked it up and glanced at the caller ID. His expression changed completely. Mum? It's your lawyer. Margaret froze. Why would he be calling this late? Something wasn't right, she answered the phone slowly, and the words she heard next would change the entire direction of the story. Margaret, we have a problem with the trust fund. Margaret felt a small jolt in her chest as she pressed the phone closer to her ear. Her lawyer never called in the evening. Something had to be wrong. Margaret, he said carefully, I didn't want to wait until tomorrow. This concerns the trust fund. Daniel and Lisa watched her closely, their faces filled with worry. Margaret took a deep breath. What happened? There's been an attempted withdrawal request. Margaret's eyebrows furrowed. A withdrawal? From who? The lawyer hesitated. Someone used Daniel's name and tried to access the emergency portion of the trust before the freeze. But the signature didn't match. Daniel's eyes widened. What? I never made any request. Margaret's heart tightened. Her voice stayed calm, but inside she felt a small tremor. Is the money still secure? She asked. Yes. Everything is safe, but we need to understand how someone got enough information to try. Margaret glanced at Daniel and Lisa. They both looked genuinely confused, maybe even scared. Thank you for calling, she whispered. I will come to your office first thing in the morning. She ended the call slowly and placed the phone on the table. The room was silent. Danielle finally spoke. Mum, I swear I didn't request anything. I didn't even know it was possible. Believe you, Margaret said softly. Lisa's face, however, had changed. She looked uneasy, almost guilty. Lisa, Margaret said gently, did anyone else know about the trust fund? Lisa's eyes shot up. No, I only found out recently when the transfer didn't come. Have you ever talked to someone about it? Maybe a friend? A family member? Lisa shook her head quickly. No, of course not. But her fingers were trembling. Margaret didn't judge her. She didn't accuse her. She simply watched her carefully. Lisa, she said in a calm voice, is there something you want to tell us? Silence. Lisa looked down, her breath shallow. The room grew heavier, like the truth was trying to push its way out. Finally, a small, shaky whisper escaped her lips. My brother. Daniel's head snapped toward her. Your brother. What does he have to do with this? Lisa closed her eyes. He's been having financial problems. I made the mistake of mentioning that Goritsa were helping us financially. I didn't tell him about the trust fund directly, but maybe he assumed something. Margaret felt a soft ache in her chest. Not anger, not betrayal. Just sadness. Did he know Daniel's full name? She asked gently. Lisa nodded slowly. Yes, he knows Daniel. They've met. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Lisa, why? Didn't you tell us he had money problems? Because it wasn't my place to bring it here, she said, tears building in her eyes. And I never imagined he would try something like that. Margaret understood something important. In that moment, Lisa wasn't malicious. She was overwhelmed, scared, trying to balance her family, her child, her insecurities, and now her brother's issues. But still, this was serious. She reached across the table and placed her hand gently on Lisa's. You should have told us earlier, Margaret said softly. But I'm not angry. I just wish you trusted me enough to share. Lisa wiped her eyes. I didn't want to look irresponsible. I felt like I was constantly failing. At everything. You're not failing, Margaret whispered. You're drowning. And you didn't ask anyone for a hand? Daniel's voice was quieter now, more compassionate. We're family. Lisa, you don't have to handle everything alone. Lisa nodded, tears falling silently. Margaret leaned back in her chair. The situation was far more complicated than she expected. The trust fund wasn't just frozen money anymore. It was connected to fear, insecurity, and a hidden family struggle. So, Daniel said softly, what do we do now? Margaret took a deep breath. Tomorrow morning, I will meet with my lawyer, she said. We will sort out the security issue. Lisa whispered, I'm so sorry, Margaret. Margaret reached for her hand, again gentle, warm, steady. I'm not freezing. The trust fund to punish you, she said. I'm doing it to protect all of us. But after tonight, I understand more. I know the pressure you've been carrying. And once everything is secure, we will reopen the fund. Together. Lisa's shoulders relaxed in relief, but her eyes stayed. Teary. Daniel let out a long breath he'd been holding. Thank you, Mum. Margaret smiled softly. Family is not about blame. It's about fixing things before they fall apart. The tension in the room finally softened, the fear loosened its grip. And for the first time that evening, hope returned. But the story wasn't done. The next day would bring answers, some surprising, some painful, and one truth Margaret wasn't expecting at all. The next morning, Margaret woke earlier than usual. The sky outside was pale and calm, the kind of morning where everything felt oddly quiet, like the world was waiting. She prepared a cup of tea, put on her coat, and left for her lawyer's office. She wasn't angry. She wasn't anxious. She was simply ready to understand what had actually happened. The receptionist greeted her warmly. Good morning, Margaret. He's waiting for you. Margaret walked into the office to find her lawyer sitting with a folder open, papers neatly arranged. He stood and shook her hand. Thank you for coming so quickly, he said. Please, have a seat. Margaret sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Tell me everything, he nodded. The good news is, none of the money was touched. The freeze protected everything. But the attempt was real. Someone tried to access the emergency funds using Daniel's information. Margaret's heart tightened, but she stayed calm. Was it Lisa's brother? Her lawyer shook his head. No. The person who attempted the access used a fake name, but the computer logs show it wasn't related to that family at all. Marguerite blinked. Then who was it? He opened another file. It appears someone from a financial consulting company you worked with years ago accessed old data. Margaret frowned. The company that handled my retirement funds? Yes, one of their employees tried to test old access links. Because the trust fund was tied to older financial paperwork, it triggered an automated request. It wasn't someone from your family. It wasn't intentional theft. It was sloppy handling of archived files. Margaret felt the tension leave her body slowly, like a soft exhale. So Daniel and Lisa had nothing to do with it? Nothing, the lawyer confirmed. Your family wasn't involved. Margaret closed her eyes for a brief moment, thankful, relieved, lighter. She stood up, shook his hand, and thanked him before leaving the office. As she walked outside into the gentle morning air, she realized something important. Last night's hurt, tears, confusion, and fear were not caused by betrayal. They were caused by silence, assumptions, and the pressure everyone was carrying. And now, It was time to fix things. The afternoon, the conversation that changed. Everything. Margaret arrived at Daniel and Lisa's house later that afternoon. Lisa opened the door, her eyes still puffy, worry written all over her face. "Margaret," she said softly, "I've been sick thinking about everything. I didn't sleep." "I'm really sore, Lisa," Margaret said suddenly, gently. "None of this was your brother." Lisa froze. "What?" Margaret stepped inside. "The attempted access wasn't from your family. It was from an old financial company I used years ago. It's all handled now." Daniel let out a huge exhale. "So, everything's okay?" "Yes," Margaret said, smiling softly. "Everything is safe." Lisa looked like she might collapse from relief. A tear rolled down her cheek, but this one wasn't out of fear, it was release. "I'm so sorry for assuming," she whispered. Margaret held her hands. "And I'm sorry for not talking sooner. I acted out of emotion too. We were all trying so hard to protect something that we forgot to protect each other." Lisa pressed her lips together, nodding quietly. "I didn't want you to think I'm not good enough as a mother." Margaret shook her head gently. "Lisa, being a mother isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when you feel like you're falling apart. And you've shown up for Noah every single day." Lisa wiped her tears, finally letting herself smile. "Thank you, really." Vangia looked between them, his voice warm. "So what happens now?" Margaret took a breath and glanced at both of them with soft eyes. "I'm reopening the trust fund," she said, "but with a small change." Daniel sat up straighter. "What change?" Margaret looked at them lovingly. "From now on, all decisions about the trust will be made by all three of us. Together, no secrets, no assumptions, no fears." Lisa nodded instantly. "That's fair," Daniel smiled. "That's better than fair. It's right." The ending, a new beginning for the famille. Week later, they all sat together in Margaret's living room. The atmosphere was warm. Noah laughed as he played with toy cars on the rug. And Lisa rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, more relaxed than she had been in months. Margaret watched them with a heart full of quiet peace. Sometimes family isn't broken by fights. Sometimes it's broken by silence. But that night, around the dining table, they chose truth over silence, love over pride, and unity over fear. And because of that, something beautiful happened. They didn't just fix the trust fund. They rebuilt trust between each other. Margaret looked at Noah and whispered softly to herself, This is what family is for." And she knew in her heart, freezing the trust money wasn't a punishment. It was the push they all needed to finally understand one another. And Lisa, she never told Margaret to back off ever again.